Next, we're going to have our Dr. Rafael Meza present. Of course, you guys all know him because he's been featured very highly in our symposium today. He's a professor in the Department of Epidemiology at the University of Michigan. He received his PhD in applied mathematics from the University of Washington. He is the CISNET lung group PI, one of the PIs, and he's a core leader at the Cancer Center at the U of M. And of course, he is the PI of our TCOR site here at U of M in Georgetown University called CAsToR. He'll talk about the CISNET smoking history generator and developments of it and future directions in terms of microsimulation modeling. Take it away, Rafael, when you're ready.
Thank you, Ritesh. And it's a pleasure to be with you and tell you a little bit of the work that we've been doing in CISNET and also in CAsToR, expanding the original smoking history generator in other directions. And I thank Rocky for the introductions, which will allow me to go a little bit quicker. So the smoking history generator and the CAsToR microsimulation models are very or differ from like the old or the earlier smoking models in that they really focus on how patterns change by generation or birth cohort, as well as other covariates. And as Rocky showed, we focus on modeling in quite a bit of detail the history in the US of smoking initiation, cessation, and intensity rates. The model has been expanded to consider policy effects, and there's different policies that have been modeled, and it's been used to project the impact of these in the US on overall mortality and lung cancer. This is a schematic representation of the model, where all that information that comes from NHIS, the CPS studies, human mortality database is integrated and serves as input of the simulator that generates smoking histories, individual smoking histories. Like Rocky showed, we focus on, or one key input is, for instance, the initiation rates. We have similar figures for cessation rates here shown for different generations. And as part of this work, we've been able to characterize the history of smoking in the US in a lot of detail. And for instance, we find strong reductions in smoking initiation, which is great news, particularly for recent birth cohorts. And the question is if this will continue or not, particularly in this new area of more products. And then we use the simulator to generate individual smoking histories that Rocky described. And these become the input for the CISNET lung cancer models. And when we simulate a large number of individuals, we aggregate, we actually recover the patterns of smoking in the US population. And then we can actually project according to if the current trends by cohort or generation continue, where do we think smoking is going to go in the next few years? And then, as I mentioned, those become input for the CISNET lung models that then, for instance, they can make projections of the number of lung cancer deaths in the US as they have occurred, and then project where they're going to go. And for instance, here, highlighting the fact that as smoking goes down and the population pie of never smokers increases, then we're actually expected an increase in the actual number of lung cancers among never smokers. We've extended the smoking history generator, and we have a tobacco policy tool that what it does, it modifies the initiation rates and the cessation rates under policy scenarios, and then we'll repeat the simulations to compare the impact of different policies. And in particular, the smoking history generator and the tobacco policy tool have been put together to generate the inputs behind a policy tool that we've developed, which is a website, tobaccopolicyeffects.org, where policymakers can go and look at the projected effects of 4 different policies here shown, cigarette taxes. And they can change parameters, in this case, for instance, the tax level, and then can see the effects projected either in the US or in specific states. So we continue working on this within CISNET and within CAsToR to expand many of these I guess applications and tools. So I want to go over some of these new tools that we're doing and highlight, I think, help us kind of steer ourselves also for the discussions later today. So one of course important aspect is increase or expand our work to include other policies. We've added one graphic health warnings, which is quite relevant from the perspective of FDA and just tobacco control. This is work that is under review right now, led by Jamie Tam. So please don't share, but happy to share these results now. So basically what we did is we took the parameters in terms of impact effects that were used by an earlier publication by David Levy, and then we adapted those into our smoking cistern generator and tobacco policy tool to project what is going to be the impact of the new health warnings that FDA has required for cigarette packs. And I just realized that this date might have changed now and moved to June. So I'll update my slides, but these are expected to come into effect in 2022. And then we use the smoking history generator and a version that is now a population version, so we can actually run things more rapidly to project the impact of health warnings starting either in 2022 or in 2012. Why in 2012? Because that's when the original proposal to implement health warnings in the US was passed, and then it's taken 10 years for that to become effective. So as a summary of the results, on the left, you see two figures. One shows the prevalence, observed the dots, the model predictions under status quo or baseline without warnings, and then what we expect according to the scenarios that the health warnings might do. And then you don't see much of an effect, but even in terms of absolute numbers, but even that small reductions in prevalence translate in considerable numbers of deaths averted, premature deaths averted, and life years gained. And in particular, on the right side, you can see for different assumptions of the effect of the policy or the regulation on smoking initiation and cessation, what the numbers might be. And the key point here is that the gains are considerable, or projected gains are considerable. But if we also want to look at what if we had implemented that policy in 2012 as originally intended rather than now, the gains increased by about 40%. So this is showing in some ways the cost of delays of implementation of this regulation by, I guess, primarily industry challenges, and in some ways is quantifying the impact of those. So I'll move on to another topic, which Rocky mentioned, that we're working hard to expand the smoking history generator to consider other sociodemographic groups. In particular here, for instance, we're showing rates of initiation for non-Hispanic Blacks, solid lines, and non-Hispanic whites. So comparing the two groups, they tend to initiate at lower rates, non-Hispanic Blacks versus non-Hispanic whites, and characterize the changes by generation or per cohort. And just showing another thing, that actual cessation rates are lower for non-Hispanic Blacks, and together they combine to a prevalence patterns by generation, where prevalence is lower for non-Hispanic Blacks early in life, but then increases and it's higher later in life. And we're using these inputs to now generate simulation models of smoking ends and health outcomes for US Blacks, and we'll be doing the same for other racial and ethnic groups. It's a microsimulation model. It's an extension of the CISNET smoking history generator, and incorporates not only non-Hispanic Black specific smoking parameters, but also mortality due to smoking parameters. And it's been developed so that it can, thank you, so that it can generate or consider not only smoking, but also ends. So I'll show you a couple of results. For instance, this is the projections under status quo, what I mentioned, if trends continue by generation as they are now in smoking initiation and cessation, this is where the model projects smoking for non-Hispanic Black males and females is going to be, and all the way to 2100. And then we, for instance, did a calculation of, but how much then can we attribute of the cost of this smoking for non-Hispanic Blacks in the US? So we projected the smoking attributed mortality, and here it's the numbers in terms of smoking attributable deaths and years of life lost. And then we did a scenario, a new metric that was proposed by Ken Warner and David Mendez, the maximum potential reduction in premature mortality, which is a scenario where everyone stops smoking, and then you compare the difference. And that is the maximum potential reduction in premature mortality that could be achieved if all non-Hispanic Blacks could quit. So I think related to the topics for later, it's important also to think about new metrics or standardized metrics that will allow us to compare the impact of different policies. And I think the MPRPM is a great example of that. I'll conclude just briefly telling you about, of course, it's part of CAsToR. We are extending our microsimulation models to consider multiple tobacco products, in particular here shown for two products, one cigarettes and one e-cigarettes, and then look at them together and their transitions. So this is kind of the main schematic representation of what we're trying to do. And we're trying to connect the modeling with the data analysis that is also being conducted in CAsToR. So this shows results from a paper that was led by Andrew Brower, published in Tobacco Control, that estimated transitions between cigarette and ends states or statuses, and then estimated transitions between categories of never use, non-current use, current exclusive use, and dual use. And as you can see here, we've done those for age by age. And so I've taken those, which are empirical, estimated by our own center, and then put it together to say, okay, what would be the age-specific incidence of initiation by smoking status according to that analysis in the US currently based on the PAT data. And this is what it shows. And a big question is this real age pattern, or is it a cohort age pattern? Of course, because e-cigarettes were not available when those who are 60 now were young. But it does resemble the patterns for smoking, for instance. Similarly, we have estimates for cessation based on the empirical data. And then so I took those here shown by current informed smoker and then put them into a microsimulation model that now considers both products. There is a thing that is missing, which is how do these relate to each other, and how does e-cig use will affect smoking use. So that's an open question. So here I'm going to show just three scenarios. One where e-cigs increase smoking by 10 and they don't affect cessation. That's the prevalence you see below. 1 point, the e-cig projected prevalence, this is for the 2000 birth cohort individuals. It doesn't get too high under the estimated patterns or rates from PAT. This is if rather than affect initiation, affect cessation. So now you see a reducing prevalence for smoking and the effect of e-cigarettes. If it's a 10 and 10, then you see higher early in life and then lower later in life. And then the whole point I'm not trying to say that this is going to be the future, is just to show how we can use this model for experimentation while we actually figure out what those numbers actually are. So I'll conclude and just reiterate some of the things. Maybe I'll highlight that modeling of other tobacco-related conditions, it's one of the important future directions. We've done a lot of work, and others have done a lot of work in smoking attributable mortality. We really need to do more on cost specifics. The work yesterday shown by Jamie Time is important, for instance, in that regard for mental health. Of course, extension to other tobacco products, and then the use of and measurements of longitudinal exposures and look at different output metrics. Of course, the interactions between products, we need to figure those out. And then lastly, I'll just make a point about the need to use more advanced modeling methods and dissemination tools. And these are three of the topics that, for instance, we'll be covering in the breakouts. And I think that they're relevant for this perspective. So I'll end there, and thank you.